The blade missed Elara's throat by an inch. She crashed through the market stall, oranges scattering like bloody suns across the cobblestone. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. But she couldn't stop. Not when her father's assassins were 3 steps behind her, not when the crowd was thinning, not when she could hear their boots pounding closer. There. The Nigerian girl. She ducked into an alley, pressed herself against the cold stone wall, and forced her breathing to quiet. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain they'd hear it. 2 years. She'd been running for 2 years since she witnessed her father, Duke Adeniji of the Thorn Alliance, orchestrate the murder of 3 council members. 2 years since she became the only witness who could destroy him. The footsteps passed. She waited, counted to 60, then ran again. By the time she reached her small rented room above the fish market, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. The smell of salt and decay clung to everything. This was her life now. Serafina Adeniji, daughter of one of the most powerful men in the Thorn Alliance, reduced to this. Hiding, surviving, barely breathing, she collapsed onto the thin mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling. How much longer could she keep running? The knock came at midnight, 3 precise raps. Not the aggressive pounding of assassins, something else, something worse. Elara pressed herself against the far wall, a kitchen knife trembling in her grip. "Who is it?" "Someone who can make you disappear," a woman's voice answered. Smooth, educated, dangerous. "Proper lith is time." "I don't want." "Your father's men will find you by morning. They've tracked you to this district. You have 2 choices, run again and die tired, or open this door and live." Elara's throat tightened. She wanted to tell this stranger to leave, to let her handle it herself like she'd been doing. But her legs ached. Her money was almost gone. And she was so tired of running. She opened the door. The woman standing there wore expensive gray silk that had no business being in this part of town. Her hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held the kind of coldness that came from witnessing too much. Behind her stood 2 guards in dark uniforms Elara didn't recognize. "Serafina Adeniji," the woman said, not a question. "I don't know what you're—" "Save it. I know who you are, what you saw, and why you're running. I also know you have 17 silver coins left, no allies, and approximately 6 hours before your father's hunters knock on that door." The woman stepped inside without invitation. "My name is Magistrate Yoon. I represent certain interests in the Valerius Empire." "Korean Kingdom. Empire," Yoon corrected sharply. "And yes, we have a proposition for you." Elara's grip tightened on the knife. "I'm not interested in politics." "This isn't politics, this is survival." Yoon pulled a sealed envelope from her coat. "Prince Kael Jinwoo Valerius is dying, poisoned slowly over the past year. He has perhaps 2 weeks left. The imperial family needs Somyeon to play the role of his devoted wife during his final days. Someone with no connections to the court, someone who needs to disappear. You want me to marry a dying man. I want you to pretend to care for one. In exchange, we provide you with a new identity, documentation, and permanent protection from your father's reach. The Valerius Empire's resources are considerable. When Prince Kael passes, you'll be relocated with enough money to start over. Properly this time." Elara's mind raced. "Why me?" "Because you're desperate. Because you're nobody. And because the moment you sign that marriage contract, you become untouchable. Your father can't reach you in the imperial palace, and he certainly can't reach a prince's widow." "What if I say no?" Yoon's smile was thin. "Then I leave, and your father's men arrive at dawn. I believe they prefer to make examples of traitors. Something about public executions being good for morale." Knife felt heavy in Elara's hand. She thought about running again, about the endless cycle of fear and exhaustion, about the fact that she'd once been a duke's daughter who wore silk and spoke 3 languages. Reduced to sleeping in a room that smelled like dead fish. "Long do I have to decide?" "You're deciding now," Yoon said. "The carriage outside will take you to the palace, or it will leave without you. Choose." Elara looked at the water-stained ceiling one last time, then at the knife, then at the woman who was offering her a way out, even if it meant playing wife to a dying stranger. "Do it," she whispered. "Smart girl." Yoon held out the envelope. "Sign this, your marriage contract. It's already been approved by the imperial family. You'll wed Prince Kael tomorrow at dawn. No ceremony, no guests, just you, him, and Thepriest." Elara's hands shook as she broke the seal and read the terms. It was shockingly simple. Marry him, stay until Hetty's, receive compensation and a new identity. She picked up the pen, hesitated only for a heartbeat, then signed, Serafina Adeniji, the last time she'd ever write that name. The carriage ride to the Valerius Palace took 3 hours through winding mountain roads. Elara watched the landscape change from coastal poverty to imperial grandeur. Stone walls became marble. Dirt paths became paved roads. By the time they passed through the palace gates, she felt like she'd entered another world entirely. Yoon led her through silent corridors to a forgotten wing of the palace that smelled of medicine and decay. Prince Kael's quarters, she explained. He prefers isolation. You'll stay in the adjoining room. A physician will brief you on his condition, but the summary is simple. He's dying and there's nothing to be done about it. Your job is to sit with him, read to him, pretend to care. Can you do that? Yes. The wedding is at dawn. Get some rest. But Elara didn't rest. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the silk canopy above her, and wondered what kind of man she was about to marry. Was he old, cruel? Would he even be conscious enough to know she existed? Dawn came too quickly. The ceremony took place in a small chapel that felt more like a tomb. No flowers, no music, just cold stone and the smell of incense that couldn't quite cover the scent of death. Elara wore a simple white dress they'd provided, her braids pinned back, her face carefully blank. Then he entered. Prince Kael Jinwoo Valerius. Elara's breath caught. He was skeletal, gaunt. His skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of months of suffering, but it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Sharp, monolid, dark as midnight, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to step back. He didn't look like a dying man. He looked like a predator conserving energy. 2 attendants helped him to the altar. His movements were careful, measured. Like every step cost him, but those eyes never left her face. He studied her the way someone might study a puzzle they intended to solve. The priest spoke in Korean. Elara understood nothing except the cadence of binding vows. When it came time to sign the marriage registry, Kael's hand shook as he gripped the pen. She almost reached out to steady him, then stopped herself. This was a transaction, nothing more. But when he signed his name, his fingers brushed hers, and she felt the coldness of his skin. Dying, he really was dying. Your turn, Yoon murmured. Elara signed, not as Seraphina, as Elara Valerius, her new name, her new prison. The priest pronounced them married, and Kael's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You look terrified, he said in perfect, unaccented English. His voice was hoarse but clear. Elara's spine stiffened. I was told you were too ill to speak much. I am, but I wanted to hear your voice before I waste what's left of mine. He tilted his head, studying her braids, her dark skin, the way she held herself like she expected an attack. You're Nigerian. Running from something. That's not your concern, he agreed softly. But you're my wife now. Everything about you is my concern. Way he said it made her skin prickle. Not with fear exactly, with something else. Something that felt like being seen for the first time in 2 years. Shall we go? Yoon interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with how long Kael was staring. He nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact with Elara. Yes, take me home, wife. The word hung in the air like a curse. Their quarters were larger than Elara expected, but decorated like a sick room. Medicine bottles lined the shelves. The curtains were drawn against the light. Everything smelled of herbs and resignation. Kael collapsed onto the bed with a grace that spoke of practice. He'd done this before. Fallen, gotten up, fallen again. You can leave if you want, he said, staring at the canopy. I know you didn't choose this. Elara stood in the doorway, torn between fleeing and staying. I signed a contract. Contracts can be broken. When my life depends on it. That made him turn his head toward her. Your life depends on me. She shouldn't have said that, shouldn't have revealed anything. But she was exhausted and scared, and this man was dying anyway, so what did it matter? I needed protection. They offered it, that's all. Are you hiding from someone powerful? Powerful than in his own way, yes. Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then, what's your real name? Elara, liar. But he said it without malice, almost with amusement. You can keep your secrets. I won't be around long enough to learn them anyway. Casual way he spoke of his own death unsettled her. Does it hurt? Every moment of every day. He closed his eyes. But I'm used to it now. Pain becomes normal if you live with it long enough. Elara found herself moving closer to the bed without meaning to. Is there anything I can do? Read to me. Your contract says you'll keep me company. Might as well start earning your protection. There was a bookshelf against the wall. Elara scanned the titles, most in Korean, a few in English. She pulled out a worn copy of poetry and sat in the chair beside his bed. This one, Kael cracked one eye open. You choose. I want to hear what you like, not what you think I want. So she read. A poem about the sea and longing and the weight of memory. Her voice steadied as she read, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of words. When she finished, she glanced at Kael. He He was watching her again with that unnerving intensity. "You have a beautiful voice," he said quietly. "Melodic, is that your accent or just you?" "Both, probably. I grew up speaking Yoruba and English." "Say something in Yoruba," she hesitated. "Why?" "Because I'm dying and I want to hear it." There was no manipulation in his voice, just exhaustion and a strange kind of hunger, so she whispered a phrase her mother used to say. "Letter 1 ECDM, letter 1 ECD me, I grav W, letter 1 ECD, ni I grav F, letter 1 EB9, acute me." "My child, you are my love." Kael's eyes closed. Again, she repeated it, softer this time. What does it mean? She shouldn't tell him. Shouldn't give him anything real, but something about the way he lay there, so still and fragile, made her honest. "It means you matter." His hand twitched on the blanket. For a moment she thought he'd reach for her, but he didn't. He just lay there, breathing carefully. "Thank you," he whispered. And for some reason, Elara felt her throat tighten. The days blurred together after that. Elara fell into a routine. Wake, wash, sit with Kael, read to him, watch him sleep. Try not to think about what would happen when he died. But Kael was always watching. Even when he seemed asleep, she'd feel his gaze tracking her movements. The way she tucked the blanket around him, how she adjusted the pillows, the small, unconscious hum she made when she was thinking. "You do that when you're worried," he said one afternoon. Elara looked up from her book. "Do what?" "That humming, like you're trying to soothe yourself." She hadn't realized. "I didn't know I did that." "You do it a lot." His voice was weaker today. The physician had visited that morning and left with a grim expression. "What are you worried about?" "Everything. Be specific." "Do you care? Because I'm dying and you're the only interesting thing in my life right now." He smiled slightly. "Indulge him." So she did. She told him about the nightmares, about jumping at shadows, about the constant fear that her father's men would find her even here. She didn't mention her father by name or what she'd witnessed, but she gave him enough to understand. Kael listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "You're safe here." "You can't promise that." "Can. Whatever you're running from, it can't reach you while you're my wife. And after I'm gone, they'll give you everything they promised. You'll be free." The question came out more bitter than she intended. "Or will I just be running from a different set of memories?" Kael's eyes met hers. "You'll be alive, that's more than I'll be." Stark honesty of it cut through her. Here she was, complaining about fear and freedom to a man who had neither time nor choices left. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be, I like your honesty. Everyone else treats me like I'm already dead. But you," he paused, considering. "You treat me like I'm still a person, even if you're only here for the money." "I'm not." She stopped, because he was right. She was here for the protection and the new identity. She hadn't expected to see him as human. "It's fine," Kael said softly. "I prefer your honesty to their pity." That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what he'd said, about being already dead, about how she was the only one who treated him like a person. She found herself standing in his doorway at 3 in the morning, watching him struggle to breathe through another bout of pain. He didn't call for help, just endured it silently, his jaw clenched, his hands fisted in sheets. She crossed the room without thinking. "What are you doing?" His voice was strained. "I don't know." She sat on the edge of his bed and placed her hand on his forehead the way her mother used to do when she was sick. His skin was cold and clammy. "You don't have to be alone right now. You don't have to do this." "I know," but she stayed. She stayed through the pain and the labored breathing and the awful sounds he made trying not to scream. She stayed until the episode passed and he collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "Because everyone deserves someone when they're suffering." Kael's hand shot out and gripped her wrist, not violently, desperately, like she was the only real thing in our world of ghosts. "Lie to me," he whispered. "Don't pretend you care." Not pretending. And she realized with shock that it was true. Somewhere between the poetry readings and the small silences, she'd started to care about this dying Korean prince. "I don't want you to hurt." His grip loosened but didn't release. "Dangerous words, wife." "Why?" "Because I might start believing them." They stayed like that until dawn, his hand around her wrist, her fingers cool against his fevered forehead, neither of them willing to break the connection. The physician's visits became more frequent. 2 weeks became 1 week became days. "His organs are failing," the doctor told Yoon quietly, not realizing Elara was listening around the corner. "Perhaps 3 days, 4 at most. You should prepare the wife." Elara's chest tightened. She hadn't prepared for this, hadn't prepared to actually lose him. She found Kael propped up in bed, staring out the window at the palace gardens he was too weak to visit. "They think I have 3 days," he said without looking at her. I heard. You relieved, almost free, she should have been. That was the whole point, but instead she felt hollow. No, liar, but he smiled when he said it. Come here. She sat beside him and he reached for her hand. His grip was weaker now, barely there. I want to tell you something, he said. While I still can. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He turned to face her fully, and his eyes held that same intense focus from their wedding day. These past 2 weeks, you've been the only real thing in my life. Everyone else sees a dying prince. You saw a person. Even when you were angry or scared or just going through the motions, you never treated me like a corpse. Kael, let me finish. His breathing was labored. I'm not saying this because I'm in love with you. I don't know Yao well enough for that, but I need you to know that you made these last days bearable. You gave me something to think about besides pain and poison, so thank you. Poison. He'd said poison. What did you say? Kael's expression didn't change. Poison, that's what's killing me. Someone's been dosing me for months. They think I don't know, but I figured it out weeks ago. There's nothing to be done about it now. My body's too damaged. Does it matter? I'll be dead soon anyway. He squeezed her hand gently. But I wanted you to know the truth. You deserve that much. Elara's mind raced. Someone was actively murdering him. Someone close enough to administer poison consistently. And he'd known and done nothing. Why didn't you fight back? Tried, it didn't work, and now I'm too weak to do anything except die gracefully. His eyes closed. I'm tired, Elara, so tired. She stayed with him through that day and the next, read to him when he could listen, held his hand when he couldn't, sang soft Yoruba lullabies her mother had taught her, letting the melody fill the silence. On the third night, she woke to find him watching her from his bed. She'd fallen asleep in the chair again. You cry in your sleep, he said softly. Did you know that? No. You do, every night. Little tears that slide down your cheeks. What are you dreaming about? Home, before everything went wrong. Me about it. So she did. She told him about growing up in a duke's household, about her mother's garden and her father's library and the life she'd lost when she witnessed something she shouldn't have. She told him things she hadn't told anyone, secrets spilling out in the darkness like confessions. Kael listened to it all, his eyes never leaving her face. You deserve better than running, he whispered when she finished. So did you. Yes, we both got dealt terrible hands, didn't we? They sat in companionable silence until Kael's breathing became labored again. Another episode, the worst one yet. Elara moved to the bed, pressed her hand to his chest, felt his heart racing erratically beneath her palm. Not alone, she whispered in Yoruba. Emiwa pi letter 1EB9L you are letter 1EB9. I'm with you. Kael's hand covered hers and something in his expression cracked. Not pain this time, something deeper. I wish we'd had more time, he breathed. Me too, and she meant it. The next morning, the physician announced it would be Kael's last day. His body was shutting down. It was just a matter of hours now. Yoon pulled Elara aside. The contract stipulates you must stay until the end. After that, we'll process your new documents immediately. You'll be on a ship to the Southern Territories by tomorrow night. New name, new life. Everything you were promised. Elara nodded numbly. She returned to Kael's room and found him barely conscious, his breathing shallow. She pulled a chair close and took his hand. I'm here, she said, his eyes fluttered open. Elara. Thank you, he paused, struggling, for making me feel human again. Her throat burned. You made me feel human too. Liar. But he smiled. Beautiful liar. They sat like that for hours. Elara read poetry he could no longer hear, sang songs he couldn't respond to. Held Hai's hand and watched his chest rise and fall slower and slower. At sunset, his grip went slack. Kael, she whispered, no response. The physician rushed in, checked his pulse, and nodded gravely. He's gone. Elara sat frozen, still holding his cold hand, unable to process the sudden absence. She'd known this was coming, had prepared for it, but somehow she wasn't ready. My lady. The physician touched her shoulder gently. We need to prepare the body. She nodded automatically and released Kael's hand. Then she walked out of the room on numb legs, down the corridor, past servants who bowed sympathetically. She reached her room, closed the door, and collapsed. Only then did she let herself cry. She cried for the dying prince who'd been kind when he didn't have to be. For the life she'd lost. For the person she'd become, a woman who married strangers for protection and lied about her name. She cried until she had nothing left. At midnight, Yoon knocked on her door with the promised documents. New identity. New history. Travel papers for tomorrow's ship. I'm sorry for your loss, Yoon said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe Elara actually cared. Thank you. The carriage will come at dawn. Pack light. Your new life awaits. After Yoon left, Elara packed her few belongings mechanically. The dress from the wedding. the poetry book Kael had loved. A small pressed hibiscus flower she'd used as a bookmark while reading to him. She paused at her door one last time, looking back toward Kael's chambers. She'd only known him 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks had felt more real than the entire 2 years she'd spent running. "Goodbye," she whispered to the empty corridor. Then she left. The ship departed at dawn, carrying her to a coastal town where Nigerians and Koreans traded freely. A place where she could blend in, be nobody. Be free. She opened a small bookshop on a quiet street. Let her braids grow long and loose. Reclaimed the name Elara, not Serafina, never Serafina again. For the first time in years, she felt almost human. Until 3 months later, when she saw the newspaper headline, "Dead at 27, royal funeral to be held next week," she stared at the words, at the formal portrait of Kael looking gaunt and gray. And she cried again without understanding why. But then the rumors started. Whispers that traveled from the capital to the coast, growing louder each day. Prince Kael hadn't died. He'd recovered. The poisoner had been found, his own cousin, executed for treason. And the prince had risen from his deathbed like a phoenix, reclaimed his health, and taken the throne in a bloody purge that left half the court dead. King Kael Jinwoo Valerius, the Phoenix King. Elara told herself it was impossible. She'd held his hand when he died, watched his chest stop moving. The physician had confirmed it, but then the descriptions started filtering through. The new king was tall, broad-shouldered, devastatingly handsome, cold, ruthless, terrifyingly efficient, nothing like the skeletal dying prince she'd married. It couldn't be him. Could it? She tried to ignore it. Focused on her bookshop and her quiet life and pretended the past was dead, until strange things started happening. Her shop's rent was mysteriously paid for a year in advance by an anonymous benefactor. A rare first-edition poetry book appeared on her doorstep with no note. Her landlord mentioned that a wealthy Korean merchant had been asking about her. Then her shop was audited. Shut down for irregularities she knew didn't exist. Her bank account froze. Her friends stopped visiting. One by one, the pieces of her new life crumbled. Someone was isolating her. Someone with unlimited reach and meticulous patience. Someone who knew exactly how to dismantle a life. She tried to run again, but every door closed before she reached it. Every ship refused her passage. Every refuge turned her away. She was trapped in this coastal town with no money, no allies, and the growing certainty that something terrible was coming. Then she found the pressed hibiscus flower. It was sitting in the middle of her locked shop counter, carefully preserved between glass, right where she used to keep her bookmark. The same flower she'd left behind in the palace. The same flower she'd used while reading poetry to a dying prince. Her hands shook as she picked it up. He'd kept it, and now he'd returned it, which meant no, it was impossible. But the flower sat in her trembling hands, undeniable and terrifying, and she knew with absolute certainty that somewhere in the empire, someone was watching her. Someone who remembered everything. Someone who was very much alive. That night, it rained. Heavy, punishing rain that turned the streets into rivers and drove everyone indoors. Elara sat in her empty shop, staring at the hibiscus flower, trying to make sense of the impossible. Then came the knock, 3 precise raps. The same rhythm from 2 years ago, when Yoon had offered her the deal. She knew who it was before she opened the door, knew it in her bones, in the way her breath caught and her pulse spiked and every instinct screamed run. But there was nowhere left to run. So she crossed to the door, hand shaking as she reached for the handle, and pulled it open. There, silhouetted against the rain and flanked by 2 royal guards in crimson, stood a man who should have been dead, King Kael Jinwoo Valerius. But not the skeletal, dying prince she remembered. This man was tall, broad-shouldered, healthy. His face had filled out into sharp, devastating beauty, high cheekbones, strong jaw, lips that curved into something predatory. But those eyes. Those dark monolid eyes were exactly the same, watching her with the same intensity, the same hunger, the same obsession. He was dressed in black imperial robes with red accents, water streaming off the fabric, his dark hair plaster red to his forehead. And he was smiling, not a kind smile, not a relieved smile, a smile that said, "I found you." "Hello, wife," Kael said softly, his voice deeper now, stronger but unmistakably his. "You look well." Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Couldn't process that the man she'd mourned was standing on her doorstep, alive and powerful and looking at her like she was something he owned. "You died," she whispered. "No." He stepped forward and she stumbled back instinctively. He followed, entering her shop without invitation, the guards staying outside. I recovered, quite spectacularly actually, you would have been impressed. That's impossible, I watched you. Stop breathing. Yes, convenient, wasn't it? He closed the door behind him, shutting out the rain and Thurald. Turned out the antidote worked just in time. Pity you weren't there to see it. His tone was light, almost conversational, but his eyes were cold. Don't understand, don't you? He moved closer, and she backed up until she hit the counter. He didn't touch her, just stood there close enough that she could smell rain and something expensive, sandalwood maybe. You left me, Elara, thenite before I was supposed to die. You took your payment and disappeared. That was the deal. The deal, he repeated softly, was until my final days, but as you can see, he spread his arms. My final days are far, far from over. Implication hung between them like a blade. Contract is still binding, you are still my wife, and I am still very much alive. He reached out and touched one of her braids, running it between his fingers slowly, possessively. Did you miss me? Let me go. Would I do that? His thumb brushed her cheek and she flinched. You're the only person who ever made him feel human. The only one who cried for me, sang to me, stayed with me when I was dying. His voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know what I thought about while I was recovering? While I was learning to walk again, to breathe without pain, to become strong enough to take the throne? She shook her head mutely. You, he breathed. Every moment, every memory, your voice reading poetry, your hand on my forehead. Way you hummed when you were worried. I memorized everything about you, Elara, and then you left. You were supposed to die. How inconvenient for you that I didn't. He smiled again, and it was terrifying. Because now I have questions like who you really are, what you're really running from, and why the name Serafina Adniji appears in every database I searched. Blood turned to ice. That's right, Kael said softly. I know who you are, daughter of Duke Adniji of the Thorn Alliance. Witnesto treason and murder, the girl your father has been hunting for 2 years. He tilted his head. Quite the secreto keep from your dying husband. Please. Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to turn you in, that would be wasteful. He finally stepped back, giving her space to breathe. No, I have much better plans for you. What do you want? Everything. His voice hardened. I want my revenge on the people who poisoned me. I want to destroy the nobles who stood by and watched me suffer. And I want to dismantle your father's entire operation piece by piece. And you, my dear wife, are going to help me do it. Won't? You will. Because the alternative is I hand you over to your father and let him deal with his treason daughter. I imagine it won't be pleasant. Elara's legs nearly gave out. Why are you doing this? Because you left me. The words came out sharp, wounded. Because I lay in that bed dying thinking you cared even a little bit, and then you disappeared the moment you got what you wanted. Did you even cry when you heard I was dead, or were you just relieved? I cried, she whispered. I cried for days, something flickered in his expression. Liar. Not lying, I mourned you, I kept your poetry book, her voice broke. I thought you were gone. Now I'm not. He moved close again, so close she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes. And I intend to collect on what's mine, starting with you. Not yours. Legally, you are my wife, my responsibility, my weapon. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. And I'm going to keep you very, very close while I burn your father's world down. I won't betray him. Yes, you will, because he's hunting you, and I'm offering protection. Kael's smile sharpened. Sound familiar? It's the same deal you made before. Only this time the dying prince is very much alive, and he remembers everything. The shop felt too small suddenly, too airless. When do I leave? She asked numbly. Now, he released her and gestured to the door. My carriage is waiting. You'll return to the palace, to the same quarters we shared, right next to mine, where I can see you, touch you, make sure you never disappear again. I need time. You've had 3 months. His voice went cold. Time's up. She looked around her shop desperately, at the books she'd carefully shelved, the life she'd built from nothing. I can't just leave everything. You can, you will. He walked to the door and opened it. Rain poured in, along with the imposing presence of the 2 crimson guards. Unless you'd prefer I drag you, I'm happy to do it either way. Elara's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to fight, to scream, to run, but she'd learned over the past 2 years that sometimes survival meant surrender. She walked toward the door on shaking legs. Kael's hand caught her arm as she passed, not rough but firm, possessive. One more thing, he whispered against her ear, his breath warm on her neck. Every time you think about running, remember this: I found you once. I'll find you again, and next time I won't be so generous. She jerked away from him and stepped into the rain. The carriage was massive, black lacquered wood with gold trim and the royal crest emblazoned on the door. Nothing like the simple carriage that had brought her to the palace 2 years ago. This was a cage with wheels. One of the guards opened the door. Elara climbed inside, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. The interior was lined with red velvet, warm despite the storm outside. Kael entered behind her and settled across from her with unsettling grace. He looked completely at ease, like he transported terrified women in the middle of the night regularly. Maybe he did now. She didn't know this version of him. The door closed. The carriage lurched forward. They sat in silence as the vehicle navigated through the dark streets. Elara stared out the window, watching her bookshop disappear into the rain, watching her freedom vanish. "You're angry," Kael observed. She didn't answer. "Good anger is honest." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I prefer your anger to your pity." "I never pitied you." "Liar," but there was no heat in it. "You pitied the dying prince. That's why you stayed, why you read to me and held my hand and sang those songs." His eyes glittered in the darkness. "But I'm not dying anymore, and I don't need your pity." "What do you need?" "Revenge." The word came out soft and deadly. "And you're going to help me get it." "I don't know anything about revenge." "You will. I'm an excellent teacher." The carriage climbed into the mountains. The same route she'd taken 2 years ago, full of fear and desperate hope. Now she felt only resignation. "How long will you keep me?" she asked quietly. "As long as I need you," he tilted his head. "Or as long as I want you, whichever is longer." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." She turned to face him fully. "You said I made you feel human. Is this how humans treat each other? Threats and manipulation?" Something flickered across his expression, almost like guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I learned from the best," he said coldly. "The people who poisoned me, the court that watched me die, your father who murders his enemies and hunts his own daughter." He leaned back. "The world taught me that power is the only thing that matters, so I took it, and now I'm going to use it. Against innocent people. There are no innocent people in politics, only survivors and corpses." His gaze pinned her. "Which do you want to be?" She didn't answer because they both knew she'd already chosen survival. She'd chosen it when she married him, when she ran from her father, when she opened that door tonight. The palace appeared through the rain like a mountain of light. Elara's chest tightened. She'd thought she'd never see this place again. The carriage stopped at a private entrance. Guards in crimson surrounded them immediately. Kael exited first, then offered his hand. She ignored it and climbed out herself. He smiled at that. "Still proud. Good. I'd hate it if you broke too easily." They walked through corridors she remembered, past the forgotten wing where Kael had been dying, but they didn't stop there. They kept walking until they reached the royal quarters, the heart of the palace. Kael's chambers now. The doors opened to reveal opulence that stole her breath. Everything was red and black and gold. Powerful, overwhelming, nothing like the sick room she remembered. "This is your room," Kael said, gesturing to a door on the left. "Connected to mine by that door." He pointed to an ornate door with a lock, "which will remain unlocked. You're going to watch me sleep." "If I feel like it." He moved closer. "I told you, I'm keeping you close, and I meant it." She was so tired, so overwhelmed, so angry and scared and confused that she felt like she might shatter. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you really doing this? It's not just revenge." Kael was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about this moment. "Because when I was dying, you were the only thing that felt real," he said softly. "And when I woke up alive, when I learned to breathe and walk and feel again, all I could think about was you, your voice, your tears, the way you stayed." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You became an obsession, Elara, and I don't let go of things I'm obsessed with. That's not love. No, he agreed. It's something worse, it's need, and I've learned that need is far more powerful than love. He dropped his hand and stepped back. Get some rest. Tomorrow we begin planning your father's destruction, and you're going to help me, whether you want to or not. He walked to his own chambers and paused at the door. Oh, and Elara, he looked back at her. Don't try to run. I have guards on every exit, spies in every corner, and eyes everywhere. This palace is your new cage. Get comfortable. He disappeared into his room, leaving her standing in the hallway, wet and trembling and utterly trapped. Elara entered her assigned room in a daze. It was beautiful. Silk sheets, fresh flowers, a view of the palace gardens. Everything she might have wanted. Everything except freedom. She collapsed onto the bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Kael was alive. The dying prince she'd mourned had become a king, and he'd dragged her back into a world she'd fought so hard to escape. But the worst part, the part that terrified her most, when he'd touched her face and called her his obsession, when he'd looked at her with those dark, intense eyes, a part of her had felt something. Not fear, not even anger. Something far more dangerous. Recognition. Because she'd thought about him too, every day for 3 months, wondered what might have been different if he'd lived, mourned not just his death, but the loss of the connection they'd built in those 2 short weeks. She'd told herself it was guilt. But lying here in the palace, knowing he was just through that unlocked door, she couldn't lie anymore. She'd felt something for the dying prince, and she was terrified of what she might feel for the king. A soft knock came from the connecting door. She sat up, heart racing. I know you're awake, Kael's voice came through the wood, not demanding, almost tentative. I can hear you thinking. What do you want? Silence. Then, I want to know if you really cried when you thought I was dead. She shouldn't answer, shouldn't give him anything. But she was exhausted, and raw and so tired of lying. Yes, she whispered. Another pause, longer this time. Good, he finally said. That means it was real, at least some of it. She heard him walk away from the door, back to his own room. Elara lay back down, pulled the covers over herself, and tried to ignore the fact that the man who'd held her captive was also the man she'd held while he was dying. Tried to ignore the locked door between them that might as well have been open. Tried to ignore the terrifying truth that she didn't know if she wanted to run from Kael. Or run to him. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Thunder rolled across the mountains. And in the palace of the Phoenix King, a Nigerian woman and a Korean emperor lay in separate rooms, connected by a door neither could bring themselves to close completely. Both of them knowing that tomorrow, everything would change. Both of them wondering if the other was thinking the same thing. And both of them terrified of the answer. Tomorrow, the real game begins. Elara will learn the truth about her father's crimes. Kael will reveal the depths of his revenge, and neither of them will be prepared for what happens when obsession collides with truth. Will Elara become Kael's weapon, or will she destroy him first? Find out in Part 2, The Phoenix King's Revenge. If you're hooked on this story, smash that subscribe button because Part 2 drops soon, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment telling me, Team Kael or Team Elara, and hit that like button if you want more dark romance stories like this. Part 2 coming soon. The Revenge, it's just beginning.